Let's take a look at Adobe Walls. This is volume one of a series of Indian War tactical battles from America's history. I guess maybe the best way to think it is a little bit larger scale than, say, a squad leader game, but it's significantly smaller than most of the Civil War battle games that I play. The scale, let's get these, I haven't fully set up yet for various reasons. The scale runs, let's find it here, about 10 people per strength point. Normally it's 100, and you're like SPI era, Great Battles of the American Civil War, and I assume the later variants as well. And other games seem to cover that kind of level or step back further like CWB does. So this is a much smaller scale battles or size, and it goes into a little bit more detail in order to cover that. Not a whole lot more, about the level of detail, a little further than like all the options on something like a terrible swift sword type game would have. You'll notice I'm in a different place. In what was once, still really is, if I can get this shit out of it, the best of the bedrooms in the house. And I'm down here because the temperature sucks or will suck over the weekend. And this is a long game. I'm going to be running through some hot days. The reason I can't play in here, well, that I haven't been playing in here, is all this shit. But also, my wife didn't want the noise. Her room adjoined this one. But after the flood, I was playing Gloomhaven, and you can see some of it still set up before the flood happened. After the flood, which was, a couple of years ago or whatever, I had guys come in and let's just, do some totally random shit in here to skip ahead. But, I know you guys. I had, this was where the flood was centered, and I had guys come in and put in a sump pump, and they had to dig a channel on the wall, and they took down all my paneling, which is now on the side. They gave me the name of a carpenter, and but they cut the bottom of all the framing out, and I tried to contact the carpenter and didn't really get a response. Didn't respond by email. They gave me an electrician too, which was really important because they cut a wire. That guy came within a day or so and handled everything except that plug for obvious reasons. And I couldn't get the carpenter, and I've been kind of trying ever since, but I'm not very good at this kind of thing. And it's very hard to get anybody who will just respond by email. I'm hoping... I looked back on my discussions with a guy I know locally who said, hey, I think I have a contractor that we can set up. He came by and rode by my place, but didn't actually meet me or look at it. And I was worried because I thought it was June. It turns out, no, he said he wouldn't be free until July. So I've still got hope, which of course means I do nothing. Like, I was activated enough to be really upset about the situation here, my sink, all kind of other stuff. But now I have a potential way forward, And by the time, I get blown off or whatever, I probably will not I'm certainly not as activated as I was right after my wife died. Anyway, back to the game, which is what we're doing here, but you know, I've grown to care less and less about what I put in my videos. What happened with this one? Well, you know, it caught my eye right away. I'm interested in tactical level, late gunpowder era games. And these are battles that I had not seen, you know, covered before. This is the first battle of Adobe Walls, which is interesting because the thing that sparked my attention to it was perhaps some later battle of Adobe Walls with Quanah Parker being involved in an attack on some cattlemen or something like that, in conjunction Comanches and whatever. Here you've got Kiowa and Comanche, I believe. If got Kiowa there, a bunch of Comanche over here, and we've got a number of different types, a number of things to help us play this game. First of all, a nice big terrain key. Wow. I'm not used to that. It's a nice big map, too. And a nice paper map. It's kind of glossy. That's the nature of things. Oh, Legion. So, I met Randy Lean, who probably developed this. Yeah. And at Consim World a long time back. And he seemed like a cool guy. And I also I've play tested a couple of things, you know, just not seriously, just sort of blind testing at the con, whatever. And I was happy with Toulon. I'm trying to remember what else I played. Obviously, I played some of Didier Roy's La Bataille, the L'Empereur series, which is my second favorite Napoleonic series. Not quite as good as the NBS eventually got, but you know, it's the only other game that plays with written orders that I know of, so right there it kind of wins. It just doesn't have quite as detailed a system form. Okay, so I picked this up with the, hey, entry point into a new system and company that I want to give more attention to because I've kind of liked some things they've done and whatever. And then it's just sat in my piles. And the fact that, you know, I was listening to some podcast, Bloody Beaver. Guy's funny. He doesn't know much. He just looks stuff up on Wikipedia, basically. And he usually doesn't read much books, but then he traces stuff down, and sometimes he does interviews to get additional information or whatever, but isn't really willing to like do the reading and that type of full research very deeply. Anyway, what the hell? Just can't stay on track, can we? So I wanted to do this, but I wanted to give this a shot and maybe pick up others of the series, but it's just been sitting, you know, in those piles and unplayed. And so I figured, well, this is the time to try it because I'm not quite in the mood to, you know, spread out a GBOH mixture of, like if I go on to the, wow, I'm taking my time here, the Indian one. I don't really have a lot of room to set up counter trays and all kind of crap like that. So a one mapper and a little bit of extra space down here, that seems to fit. You know, if I had this room completely cleared out, I could play other things in here. But the reason I'm down here is the heat. And this seemed like a good idea. And definitely have to avoid things like DAC or the big L'Empereur game. So I wanted to go with this. So what do we got? The game covers small units, either of Braves or U.S. soldiers in this case. It's got leadership and we got these pony herds, which on the other side of them turn into pony holders, which are younger boys from the tribe keeping things. And units are almost invariably, there are a couple of exceptions, like infantry, either mounted or dismounted. If they're dismounted, their horses have to be somewhere. Well, the horses that are somewhere are right here. There should be some additional pony holders to cover these units. And there may be more than I need, but I don't know if you can get ponies out of stealing U.S. horses. And then you have, this is U.S. Cav. There's some infantry, but it's not going to be in the historical scenario. There's a couple of howitzers, which have multiple counters for them. This is sort of the standard formation for the howitzers, either limbered or unlimbered, but they could be abandoned, in which case the crew comes off of them, or mired, in which case they're stuck and you have to try to get them out of there. And they can actually get wrecked, but you don't have anything for that. The U.S. also has horse holders. When you dismount, the strength of a unit drops by 1, and you create a horse holder in the space, which will be holding the horses. Again, a little bit of detail. Pack train, it's not going to be in this scenario, which I think means the breastworks aren't going to be in this scenario. And I think these ammo boxes may not be. You have casualty markers for the leaders. There's an additional leader who's not in the scenario. Bunch of markers, strength point markers, different statuses. This is kind of interesting. So, if you recall from the old TSS system, and possibly from other systems like it, they're like later versions of the Great Battles of American Civil War. There's sort of a concept of an offensive fire phase, then you move, and then the two sides trade shots. This carries that on, but goes into a little bit more detail, so you have to mark if the unit fired during the offensive fire phase. It gives some better counter holding for it. You've got things that will look very familiar to you, like pinned and routed condition, but you also have a disrupted condition. Oh, what do you do? You have rules for looting the camps. You also have rules for burning the camps. That'll be on the other side of them. And then there's rules for burning just the grass, which is a tactic that you can use to create a diversion between you and your enemy. You have a bunch of player aids in the game. One of which, geez, my printer is just shit now, and I don't understand. I'm not low on ink. It's just creating these stripes on everything in the black and white. I'm low on color ink, but that's no big deal. But yeah, you have this roster to keep track of ammunition. That's an optional rule, which I will be playing with. I don't think I'll need this. You have a bunch of different combat cards. Now, each of these is single-sided, and a bunch of the counters are single-sided too. So, for example, the numeric counters are all single-sided, which to me is a little weird. They made an entire counter sheet single-sided. I'm sure that comes out cheaper to print that way. And similarly, the charts are probably cheaper single-sided. But with the charts, there may have been a design decision to provide two charts, because paper is the expensive thing, not the printing costs. Usually. I mean, I don't know what I'm talking about, right? But anyway, I find that a little odd to have chosen to print the sheets single-sided rather than double-sided. It certainly doesn't make a lot of difference to me. I can't say that I have any. Usually when I'm playing solo, if I have like two copies of the chart, and that's the case here, I'll have one on one side and one on the other anyway. And if I'm playing opposed, well, I have more time to flip around and look for stuff. So you got your fire combat and different rules that largely relate to that. Your morale check table looks pretty complicated there. You have a melee table similar to what you'll have in the melee CRTs. It's odds based as opposed to strength point based. This is strength point based. Interestingly, you don't have weapon differentiation. Now, this may be because the cav is all and infantry are all armed with similar weapons, and the Indians are armed with so many different types of weapons that they cannot be distinguished by unit type. So they have their own column that's different from the US. And then you have multiple copies of that. And then you have this extra chart to handle howitzers, firing movement, and field of fire on them, which is, again, there's a fair amount of information on each of these charts. So it is more detailed. Think about, if you think about TSS, the fire combat, the melee table, and the morale table probably all fit on one of these sheets. A little bit smaller print than this has, but here we're talking about, 3 pages of charts instead of 1. So that's fairly significant. The rule book, yay. These dice, I'll end up using them, I guess, because otherwise I have to run back upstairs. The rule book is made out of real paper. I don't know if their rules still are. Everybody seems to be moving away from real paper. It's a fairly thick stock. Of course, like anything, staple's a little rusted because I've had it for so long, and Oregon gets wetter than Phoenix did. I don't think it was rusted in Phoenix. But anyway, plenty of room if I need to look to see if there's errata, if anything starts to confuse me. But so far it's pretty readable and seems to make sense. And so there's, paper that I can write on if need be. There is, with the staple situation, if I'm thinking about staples because my compass game, the rule book basically got torn around the staple and fell apart. And I'm hoping this doesn't happen. It's a stiff stock. I don't remember that ever happening with real paper. This was a stiffer stock, glossy paper. Yeah, we think about the weirdest things too. I should give you the tour of the house again instead. Yeah. It smells funny down here. But it didn't used to. It's been closed up too much. If the staple just rusts and breaks, I can replace that. It's not the most pleasant thing in the world, but I can manually insert a staple and pry it into place. I can't do that with if it rips the paper, and yeah. I mean, I guess I could put a staple somewhere else in the booklet and through other pages, but yeah. Alrighty. So let's start looking at the rules, I guess. But I am fatigued already because I've been chattering so much. So I'm going to pause, take a drink of tea, grab my pipe, and then sit down and look at the rules. Shoot. I forgot one of the player aids, which this is very important. This is the one that tells you what the counters actually mean. So at the top of the tribal ones, they have the name of the specific chief of that counter and a shield. I don't know what that means. That's to indicate which tribe they're from. They're there. On all the counters, on combat counters, you have a combat strength movement allowance. Howitzer is weird. That is sort of combat strength. It's melee strength. And again, you have a melee strength here. The white box on these guys indicates that they can't actually assault. This thing can actually fire and assault, but it's not going to be in this scenario. For leaders, you have 3 ratings. A leader rating, which adds for morale checks, melee combat, and I think that's it. A command radius, which we'll get to, and a movement allowance, which is self-explanatory. command radius, we'll get to it because I don't remember, like, there are some things where the command radius matters, like your ability to rally units, I think, but you can't add your leader rating unless you're stacked. And again, another sheet that is single-sided and doesn't have a whole lot. It's got the full sequence of play on it, though, which could be useful. But the full sequence of play is not that complicated, to tell you the truth. It's very similar to what you'd see, again, in Great Battles of the American Civil War. Have I been saying Great Battles of History instead of that? I bet I might have. Rally, offensive fire. But here you're allowed to fire more than just artillery. Movement, defensive fire, advance fire, which is the normal attacker fire phase. That's usually the small arms fire. Retreat before melee, no shock there. An actual melee phase, and the end of the phasing player turn. Unlike those earlier designs, you do not move into the same hex to melee. So, what can we say here? We went over these largely. Fractions. Retain all fractions unless instructed not to do so. And you're either going to roll 1 or 2d6 for anything. So, one of the more interesting things is this offensive fire phase. This is kind of a little different from what's usually there. The phasing player is allowed to fire eligible units. They can either fire full strength, in which case they can't move during their movement phase. And we're a little tight here. We have unit fired status, and we have unit fired 1/2 status. Because you can fire at half and then move half your movement allowance, or you can not fire and move full. All right. The phasing player moves all their routing units first. Blah, blah, blah. You pay movement points to mount or dismount. You have a prone status in this game. Did I put that on here? There it is. That's one I didn't notice. And you also track ammo in this game. Now, there's different ways you track ammo. Kind of like there's different orders rules for the Emperor series. This one really worries about ammo tracking. And uh-oh, my battery is not charging over there. Okay, where were we? Yeah, we have the prone, which building breastworks, again, takes a full movement to do. Then the defending player, the non-phasing player, gets to conduct firepower, full firepower, basically. They also have opportunity fire options in here. And again, they're similar to the ones in the GBACW. Advancing fire, you can conduct fire combat with eligible units. Only those that didn't fire an offensive fire can fire in the advancing fire phase. And they can do so even if they move their full movement allowance. If the units fire during this phase, they fire at half strength, no matter what. So if you want to fire a full firepower, you can't move. Or you wait until your defensive fire, but you get that fire for free. Howitzers are an exception to this. If they actually move, they can't fire, but they're allowed to, I think, limber and unlimber and fire, and they're allowed to rotate position in hex, which costs movement points normally in fire. Then you do melee. If you're not pinned or routed and you're adjacent to the enemy, you can declare melee. The enemy can then attempt to retreat, which isn't a guaranteed thing. And that can cause opportunity fire, kind of like what would have been called a withdrawal fire. Well, there wasn't a retreat before melee in those systems, so. And then you switch sides, and you keep playing until you get to the end of the turn. Grass fires get reduced. They're going to have a number, I guess, under them for how long they're allowed to burn. And no, I don't know this artillery target hex. Artillery affects more than one unit, so it's probably to mark the hex while you work your way through it. So you hit your pile. You have zones of control in the game. And all combat units except horse holders have full zone of control. Horse and pony units and routed units, imagine that, have something called a partial zone of control, which is only over the hex that they occupy. And finally, leaders and pony herds on their own have no zone of control. The zone of control affects withdrawal, retreat, and movement. Doesn't go through impassable. Okay, a friendly unit will negate the effects of an enemy zone of control for withdrawal fire and retreat fire. You're going behind the front line in these cases. And retreat movement. It does cost an extra movement point to exit a hex from an enemy zone of control. If movement's expressed only in hexes rather than movement points, it doesn't affect it's not affected by zone of control. You can go from one zone of control to another, but you'll be being perhaps shot and you pay extra movement. Stacking, you are allowed to stack up to 25 combat factors at a hex. Now, hexes are big, units are small. Let's see what they say. Each hex is about a quarter mile across. Remember that 25 combat units is what, 2.5 strength points in TSS. Pack trains count as 6 stacking points. Indian camps, there's only 1 allowed per hex. They're set up, they don't move. They do not count against stacking. You're allowed to have no more than 2 combat units of any size in the same hex as a camp counter, along with 2 horse and pony holder counters. Now remember, the horse and ponies each count 6, so that's 12 plus 2 units, which could be, there's an 8 unit here. So now we're at 20, 24. You just filled everything, and there's still tents there somehow. A little bit of fuzz there, but whatever. It may have more to do with maintaining command and control over the unit while it's in that space than anything else. Movement, nothing too complicated here. We got movement allowances, which are actually written right here. Right. Are they correct? Yeah, okay, so this is not 1/2 of a movement point. It's 1 while mounted, 2 while dismounted. Okay, and let's take a look. You have the same number of movement points on both sides. This is brilliant. To make the movement point cost for the formation, which often is the case anyway, it is in GBACW, but by charging you more for being dismounted, it means that you can go less distance while dismounted overall, rather than trying to say, okay, here's how many movement points you have in each of these formations. Because here's the thing, when you switch formation mid-turn, then you don't have to do something like it costs half your movement allowance to switch formations. No, it's got a basic cost, and it just comes off that, time. Right? You can go further while mounted because the costs are lower. It is really brilliant, and it's an innovation that is so obvious once you start thinking about it. But as soon as it's pointed out, but I don't think I ever thunk it. So we have the costs for things here, and then more difficult terrain for the mounted units to move into. They don't have a reduction for, right? Which works out perfectly. There is the Adobe Fort here. It's not very big. That'll have other effects. It's basically clear terrain otherwise. There are elevation levels spelled out here with change being indicated on here. There's 3 levels. Let's see if they can make sense. So I think this is level 1, this is level 2, this is level 3. Not so sure about this, but it's definitely goes up 1, 2, 3 there. This doesn't look as dark to me. I don't know. That bluish stuff there, if we move Here we've got other stuff on here that's spelled out. And we'll talk about it. The Canadian River, which confused the hell out of me when I heard this on the podcast, because I'm like, wait, aren't we in Texas or something? Yeah. Okay. Costs 3 movement points to cross at a non-ford hex side. Fords and creeks cost 1 each, the creeks being the thinner little pieces. Let's see if there's anything exciting. You can't enter an enemy hex, an enemy unit hex. You can pass through friendly occupied hex with no extra cost. Prone. You have 2 choices with prone if you want to move. You can spend movement points to change to being not prone and then move. Or you can do a low crawl for all your movement points to move to the next hex. If you fired half strength, you get half your movement points in the movement phase. If you fired at full strength, you don't get to move. Assuming you get to move, i.e. didn't fire full strength, for example, you can move 1 hex no matter what, as long as it's not impassable. You have to spend all your movement points to enter that hex, even if the cost would exceed the movement points. You may exit an enemy zone of control or move from zone to zone. You may not spend movement points prior, during, or after this movement for any other purpose. So you can't like change position. And low crawl works the same way. You use up all your movement points and you don't have to worry about looking at costs. Retreat and out movement are not regular movement. When you leave an enemy zone of control, it costs you an extra movement point. That's going to be hard to remember for me, and I don't see it on here. The reason that's going to be hard to remember is it just doesn't show up in other games very often. Changing unit modes. Okay. So the complicated unit mode to change into, in a way, is mounted. When you dismount, you create a horse holder. When a mounted U.S. cavalry unit dismounts, strength points are reduced from the unit, and it's always 1, I believe. And you get a horse holder unit to indicate that extra strength point of cav dudes. When deployed on the map as horse holders, they're subject to all the rules for any other combat unit, but you'll notice they have a square on them, which means they can't melee attack. Scouts and the headquarters use 0 strength horse holder counters. Those are up here. Because, why? Let me look at the scouts. Here's a scout. They don't lose strength points. Dismounting. Okay. If you dismount, you flip the counter over to your dismounted side. You put a horse holder in the space. If the unit would be eliminated by doing this and just turn into a horse holder, you can deploy it as a 1 strength unit and no horse holder will be placed on the map. That unit has now given up its horses. It's let them go free. Without a horse holder on the map, you'll see there's no way to mount back, because in order to mount, you have, unless you find somebody else's horses. In order to mount up, you have to have the unit and the horse holder in the same hex. Both units can move prior to mounting. It costs 1 movement point to mount. When the unit mounts, remove the horse holder unit from the map and flip the counter to its mounted side. For every movement point expended by the horse holder in the current movement phase, a quarter of the mounting unit's remaining movement points after mounting are expended. You're kind of allowed to fudge and move multiple units at once, is what they're saying there. Pony holders are similar, but Indians use pony holders, but their combat factor doesn't go down. Basically, they have some young boys along with the Braves, and the boys get left behind when they're not counted into any of the combat. They just hold horses. Prone, you have to be dismounted to go prone. You can lose your horses or ponies through various means. Fire combat. Each combat unit has a combat strength factor. This is the unit's fire strength in personal and ranged weapons, such as bow and arrow, blah, blah, blah. U.S. units have rifles. Indians have a variety of stuff. And the howitzer has howitzers. Okay. Generally, fire combat, let's get one of these, is going to be in adjacent hex. However, you can use long-range fire. Fire combat's triggered during the movement phase if a unit withdraws, and during melee phase if the unit retreats before melee. Each friendly unit fires individually at a single enemy target unit. Leaders cannot be targeted, but if they're attached to a unit. Generally, they will be attached to a unit unless they're alone in a hex. The firing player indicates the firing unit and target enemy unit. Apply any modifiers, which will be listed along here. Excuse me. Long range generally halves your strength unless your infantry it shifts one column, which is basically a -1 for everyone. What you're going to have here is the number of strength points of the unit, the state of the unit, and you'll notice prone and mounted are not as good as dismounted. You want to get higher up in the alphabet, and then you'll roll on here with modifiers based on this. The target unit's situation can come into effect. The density of units in the hex is a modifier. The terrain is a modifier. There is line of sight in the game. If you're doing long-range fire, it's not too complicated. Okay. I'm not going to go through all those mods. We have charts like this, which are kind of a different format, I think, of charts that are on the table. Slightly different. Not really. It's got a line through it. I don't know why these are here. They led me to wonder, oh, are there any charts and tables? Well, I found them, and I'm like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure why they took up the space for that. Long range is when you fire on a unit that's 2 hexes away. Horse holders cannot fire at long range. You must be dismounted or prone to fire at long range. You cannot you cannot violate line of sight rules when firing at long range, and they have fire strength in general, except for infantry. Let me look. Yay, my battery's still working. If you have less than 1 fire factor, for the US, they get to fire on their weakest table. For the Indians, they can't fire at less than 1 fire factor. Well, they can't have an effect. Line of sight. Wooded hexes, Indian camps, and the Adobe fort block the line of sight. You can fire into them, but not through. If a unit has a strength greater than, any unit with a strength greater than 1 blocks the line of sight, unless that unit is prone or behind breastworks. If the target unit is at a higher elevation than both firing and intervening, and the firing unit is not lower than the intervening unit. I'm sorry. If the target hex is at a higher elevation than both the firing and the intervening, and the firing unit is not lower than the intervening unit, the line of sight is not blocked. Also, if the firing unit is at a higher elevation than the intervening unit, period, the end, the line of sight won't be blocked. I don't think that's going to cause any problems here because long-range fire is 2 hexes. An intervening hex, but this is not a sufficient line of sight algorithm in general. An intervening hex cannot be at a higher elevation than both the fire and target. Okay. Fire combat results table. As you can see, it's got a number of different results. MC means you get a morale check. MC -1, morale check with a 1 subtracted from it. And a 1 or a 2 is the amount of casualties done on the unit. If a unit takes casualties, it makes a morale check. The morale check itself is over here. You roll 2 dice. It's got modifiers based on various factors around there, including the leader who's within command radius for the leader for a morale check. And that'll result in different possible effects. Route puts you in a routed state. You get a marker, you retreat, and you will continue retreating until rallied or you reach a rally point. Pinned, you're stopped from moving, and it has an impact on your fire capability. You are allowed to fire while pinned in this game. You can pin a routed unit. Disrupted. Well, that is actually more like a formation state than anything else. And we don't really have formation states, but we have the status like prone and stuff like that. Disrupted is sort of like that. It's going to cause some penalties. You spend a movement point to undisrupt your units. You don't need leaders or anything like that. If there's an R in front of the Indian losses, they retreat in addition to... Let's just make sure. I don't see it. There it is. They retreat 1 or 2 hexes based on the situation, which can cause additional fire. Okay. Opportunity fire. Oh, leader casualties. Leaders can be killed or wounded when the unit that when any unit in the same hex that the leader's with takes a casualty. You make, or if there's a natural die roll on the fire combat table. Now this is interesting. There's special natural rolls. If you roll a natural 2, there's a chance of a leader casualty of the unit of the stack you're firing at. If you roll a natural 5, there's an ammo depletion under the basic rolls. I think we're going to play the advanced rules, which is why I photocopied things. Anyway, if you get a leader casualty, you roll on the leader loss check, and you will either be killed or wounded. Killed is pretty easy to explain, although there are replacement leaders that can come into play. So, if you're wounded, you roll on this wound severity table. If it's a light wound, it doesn't do anything. A moderate wound will flip you over, and you've got reduced factors. A severe wound complicates things. You have to bring the leader back and try to heal him. Otherwise, he will die. And he's useless until he's brought back. And when he's brought back, he's moderately wounded. I don't think there's any stacking of these effects. When you leave an enemy zone of control during friendly movement phase, or if you retreat before melee, all enemy units exerting a zone of control on that unit can fire at the unit. You have to declare, before you make any rolls, which units are firing. This is important in the basic game because you have chances of ammo depletion. In the advanced game, because you're spending ammo with every shot. If you get a good result, you still have to, even if you get a maximum result possible, like you wipe the unit out, you still have to fire those other units in order to reduce ammo. Leaders moving by themselves don't trigger opportunity fire. Retreat fire, if you enter a zone of control during a retreat, you trigger retreat fire, and this happens during combat or melee retreats. Okay, we need to pause for a bit, and then I'll do melee combat in a little bit. We're almost halfway through. Pretty sure what's bothering me, my sniffles and such not, is actually I have my weed whacker in here, and it's coated with grass and a bunch of yard crap in here. And again, this is because I can't use that other room. Even though I've already started squirreling some stuff in there for whatever reason when they got my dryer fixed. Alright, melee combat. What happens in melee combat? First off, you declare all your melee attacks. Howitzers can fire defensively in melee. They would be firing canister at that point. Retreat before melee is handled. Then you make your rolls and whatnot and see what happens. Let us take a look at the chart. And so you figure out an odds, and it's going to be based on the player that it's involved. You have a straight die roll with modifiers. Modifiers are listed here. You'll notice, unlike most games of this period, low ammo or out of ammo, depending on which ammo flavor you use, is going. I'm sorry, I have something. Is going to be a penalty, and that makes sense. You know, you generally are firing your weapons in the close combat. And let's see, infantry gets a general bonus. Disrupted is a penalty. The defender also has their own bonuses there, many of which are terrain features that the enemy would have to pass through. All right. Restrictions. You can't fire advancing fire into a hex that's different from the hex you're going to melee attack. So if you do advancing fire, that is the hex that you can advance into. That you can melee into. If half your points are made up of infantry, you get a bonus. Infantry units, which we don't have in this game, in this scenario. There's an optional scenario where Kit Carson waits for, or has more of his forces available, including the infantry. You can't divide a unit and attack multiple adjacent hexes. You attack one hex, and you may throw in multiple units to attack. Individual attacking units of a stack can not melee multiple target hexes. If you're doing a melee attack, you have to, whatever you commit goes into one enemy target hex. The melee is not mandatory, you don't have to do it. The pack train's horse pony holders, prone units, pinned and routed units, and gun crews can never melee attack. Results, you've got C indicates a casualty amount, R is a retreat, which will disrupt you at the end of the retreat. And RT is a route, which puts you in normal route movement. Okay. Terrain effects are listed here. Some of them are not all the time. So like light woods here, there's a -1 on here, but it's not. It's only if you're dismounted. This is going to be difficult. I might want to put some notations in there for the couple of dismounted ones. Because, yeah. Because like Marsh is not dismounted. You get the bonus there no matter what. These are not entirely cumulative. You take the biggest, let's see. You take a hex side, and an elevation modifier is the maximum you're allowed. Okay. Leaders. The senior leader present uses his command rating as a modifier to the die roll in both directions. If you melee a routed unit, the unit must attempt to retreat before melee. If it cannot retreat, it has to remain in the hex and take a melee combat, and it will defend at half its strength. Pinned and disrupted units have modifiers in there. So retreat before melee. Normally you can choose, and if you're routed you must, attempt to retreat before melee. This is done after any howitzer fire, before the actual melee resolution. You announce which units you're going to, the attacker announces what he's going to melee. The defending player must immediately exercise his option to retreat before melee, or accept. If the defender attempts to retreat any of his units except those that are pinned, there's going to be a table for this. And this has modifiers as well. So on a 1 you fail and you're disrupted, but otherwise you either get to retreat or not. And so like mounted units attacking dismounted, makes it harder to retreat, which makes sense. The leader gives a bonus there. Okay. If you do retreat before melee, there's a possibility for pursuit. Okay. The attacking player can attempt to pursue any units that retreated before melee. If all units in the target hex retreat before melee, the attacking player can attempt to pursue any of those units. For each attacking unit or stack, you roll a die. On a 1 or 2, the dismounted units can move a hex, and all mounted units can move 2 hexes. If after the pursuit movement, any attacking units are adjacent to retreating units, the melee combat can be reinitiated. We didn't talk about the distance of retreat. They're allowed to retreat 1 or 2 hexes. They're subject to opportunity fire. After all retreats are completely resolved, after all melees are completely resolved, all the attacking units may advance into adjacent hexes that were vacated by the defender. Pinned units may not retreat before melee. Leaders are not required to retreat before melee. Pursuing units may not enter enemy-occupied hexes, even if the retreating unit passed through that hex. Let me see if the result. If after pursuit, any attacking units are adjacent to any retreating units. So you can't slam into another unit on a pursuit, and the enemy can slip behind you. Retreat movement. When you have to retreat due to a combat result or a failed morale check, you may have to go 1 or 2 hexes. You must retreat that number of hexes. The retreats go to a hex not in an enemy zone of control before one in an enemy zone of control. If you retreat into an enemy zone of control, you take fire, so you probably don't want to do it anyway. You may not end the retreat movement in a hex that would violate stacking. You are allowed to continue retreating until you find an eligible hex if that's forced. But that'll disrupt a friendly unit. Retreat movement is not normal movement. If you retreat off the map, you're permanently removed from the game, but you do not award victory points. This is weird because, like, if you move off the map voluntarily, you do. Route movement. When you take a route, you get a route marker. Now, route is weird. First of all, there is mandatory route. If you take a route result from either combat or a morale rally check, you have to do route movement. This is required. Mandatory route movement does not end until the unit rallies, reaches a hex where its route movement ends, or exits the map. The initial route is going to be shorter, and I think it's 2 hexes. Subsequent routes will be your full movement point allowance, I think. Voluntary route, if you're being fired upon or meleeed, afterwards you can choose to route. So the route movement execution. Dismounted units retreat 2 hexes. Mounted units retreat 3 hexes away from the enemy. If you can't retreat during a route, you're eliminated. Any subsequent route is done at 4 hexes dismounted or 8 hexes mounted. Sorry, I thought it was full movement. Routed U.S. units that fail to rally continue to route towards the column headquarters, which I don't think is in the game. The closest non-routed U.S. unit or leader, Woods, the Adobe Fort, or the pack train. I know the pack train's not in it. Units that are initially routed and stacked in any of these listed locations must retreat to another eligible location. Let me check if the command unit is here. This is interesting because it doesn't show up in either the base scenario nor in the alternate scenario. Let me fish out the pack, the command thing. It doesn't do much, but it's important for rallying. Okay. If you're routed in one of these listed locations, you have to retreat towards a different location. Also, if you decide to extend your route, you have to retreat towards a different location. Mandatory U.S. route movement ends when you're stacked with or adjacent to a non-routed unit headquarters of the pack train in a light woods hex, not in line of sight of an Indian combat unit, and no Indian combat units within 15 hexes of the routed unit. Yeah, good luck with that. Or if the unit rallies. U.S. units may voluntarily route. They can also voluntarily continue route unit movement if they've reached a hex that would stop them. Indian units may they route retreat as indicated by the initial route sequence away from the enemy. Once the unit's 3 hexes away from an enemy, a U.S. unit, they're no longer mandatory route. They can rally to remove the effects of route. They can also choose to continue to route move, but then they have to route towards the nearest map edge. Routed units cannot fire. They cannot melee. Their melee strength is halved if they're attacked. They don't have a zone of control except in their own hex, which I don't know what that means. Because you can't enter an enemy hex. So there won't be a withdrawal fire or anything like that. A unit that is routed and suffers additional casualties while in a state of route will automatically route initial move again. Routed units can become pinned, and then they're stuck with the pinned effect in addition to the route, so they won't be able to move. They cannot become disrupted. Leaders don't get routed, but they can retreat with routed units. The artillery. So the U.S. is going to have a couple of these howitzers. They're stacking. They count as 4 stacking points. If the crew is flipped to reduce side, the stacking value is 2. Here? No. Okay. We need to get the crew counters. Apparently they are always on the board with the unit. This is them. Okay. Abandoned howitzers don't have a crew counter in the same hex. They count as 0 stacking points. They're basically victory points waiting for the Indians. Howitzers are either limbered or unlimbered. Limbered counts as mounted for fire and melee. Unlimbered is dismounted for fire and melee. In terms of modifiers when you're shooting at them, whatever. They cannot melee and they don't get a modifier on fire from that. Changing modes costs 2 movement points for a full strength crew, 3 for a reduced strength crew. And again, it's going to take longer. That's what movement points are. They're the amount of time that you have. I like that solution. When unlimbering, you can face it in any direction. Howitzers cannot change modes if they're pinned or disrupted. A limbered howitzer moves like a mounted unit, but there are a couple of exceptions that are spelled out here. Unlimbered howitzers can only be moved by being manhandled. That moves them up to 1 hex. They can't move from a level 1 directly to a level 3 or from a level 3 directly to a level 1. They can't go in a marsh. These apply even for limbered. I just didn't see them there. Okay. But they also can't be manhandled across a non-ford river hex, and they can't be manhandled to retreat before combat. Howitzer can only be manhandled into an adjacent hex, and it has to make a die roll to do so. For this, we're going to get rid of a couple of these sheets. Since they're not double-sided, there's no reason. We take a look at this. We have a manhandling table. There's modifiers for that. Okay. If you get a yes result, you get to move. If you get a yes with a star, you get to move, but you might have wrecked the damn thing. And if you get a no, it stays where it is. You roll on the wrecked table, and it's either wrecked or not. If it is wrecked, it's dead. And loses its victory points. Any U.S. unit may manhandle a howitzer. The units cannot perform any other ability during the turn, and it must begin the U.S. turn in the same hex with a howitzer. I assumed that the gun crew could manhandle. If the gun crew manhandles it, it can't fire. Interesting. I guess. I'm not sure. Might be worth looking for errata for that. Howitzers moving while limbered may become mired when crossing the Canadian River if it doesn't contain a ford. You roll a die on the mired table over here, and that will give you a result. An asterisk says check it for a wreck as well. When the limbered howitzer attempts to cross one of these hex sides, you roll the d6. Yeah. Unlimbered howitzers, moving by means of manhandling, can become mired when crossing even any ford or creek. And they have their own little chart for that. If it's mired, it gets a new counter, and it remains in the hex it's in without crossing the feature. It cannot move, fire, be manhandled, or change field of fire. All it can do is be unlimbered or abandoned. Mired howitzers that unlimber must face in the opposite direction to what they were traveling in. To free a mired howitzer, the U.S. player rolls a d6 on the recovery table. Over here. And again, chance of being wrecked. You want to get it freed, and that will give you half the movement points of the howitzer back. If a howitzer is wrecked, it's gone and gives victory points. Howitzers have a field of fire. During movement and combat, you can pivot and fire outside normal field of fire, changing your primary line of fire, the center arrow, without movement point cost to any other hex side, but that will cause you a penalty when firing in combat. In order to fire, the gun crew has to be good order and not prone. You have to have ammunition, be unlimbered, and have a target within your line of sight and field of fire. There's no range. What's up with that? Range is listed here. It goes up to 4. Okay. That may cause some issues with those line of sight rolls. Let's see. Unlike normal combat rule units, the howitzers use the howitzer fire combat table. You pick the howitzer, you pick the target hex, you drop, I guess, a target hex counter in there. The howitzer is going to fire at the entire hex. You look at the fire combat results table. You have modifiers here, including a low ammo modifier, which is kind of interesting. There are conditions under which howitzers are under the basic game in which they get marked low ammo. Okay, the hex density is important for this, again, target condition. And you're going to get either an R, which makes all the units in the hex take a route move, or a number, which is a casualty point chosen by the U.S. player for each of those numbers, or no effect. The casualty check creates a route move, but in neither case is the unit actually routed. It just gets a route move, a couple of hexes, whatever. Unlimbered howitzers that defend in melee have canister that they can fire at the Indians that are initiating melee against them. Use the melee column on the howitzer table, which is quite painful looking. Apply modifiers, roll a die. It can only melee. It can only fire once in a melee, and it hits all the attackers collectively. You can pivot it to face an attacker that's outside your field of fire, but this gives you a -1 DRM in pivoting. High explosive shell can be used in melee only if canister is not available, in which case you use the column 1, which is much, much worse. Howitzer crews defend in melee as per basic rules using their combat strength. They can never initiate melee, but they can defend. If a howitzer is low ammo and involved in melee, its low ammo status does not apply in the melee modifier. This is because the canister is a separate set of ammo rounds, and we're probably going to use the most detailed ammo rules, not these. Limbered howitzers and crews can retreat before melee. Unlimbered howitzers are marked as abandoned if the crew chooses to retreat. If the melee results in a retreat or rout for an unlimbered howitzer, the howitzer is abandoned and the crew counter takes the retreat or rout. A limbered one does it itself. If you abandon a howitzer, there's going to be an abandoned marker, supposedly. There we go. In addition to the fact that the crew won't be there anymore. They cannot move, change mode, be manhandled, fire, or receive ammunition. They can be rejoined by a crew, though, and then they can work regularly. You can't turn regular infantry, regular cav or whatever into howitzer crew. Howitzers cannot be destroyed, captured, manhandled, or used by Indians at the end of the game. If they're abandoned and not stacked with a U.S. cavalry or infantry unit, the Indian gets 5 victory points, just as if they broke it. Howitzer crews are combat units with a full strength of 2 and a reduced strength of 1. They're considered mounted for fire combat and melee combat, and limbered crews are mounted for fire and melee, and unlimbered crews are dismounted for fire and melee. The crews cannot initiate melee, nor can they pursue. They defend in melee as a dismounted non-infantry unit, which doesn't quite match with what's said here. I'm not going to worry about that too much. If the howitzer has abandoned, the crew now functions as a non-infantry dismounted combat unit. It cannot mount even if horses are there. The crew can replace losses of an infantry unit, but not of a cav unit. When a crew and an infantry unit are in the same hex, the strength points of the crew may be used to replace the infantry. This is not an issue. There's no infantry in the game. The crew is going to be a reduced defensive-only unit if it's on its own. Ammunition. Okay, ammunition for the howitzers. The base rules, I'll be using low ammo rules, same for a U.S. combat unit, except howitzers don't run out of canister ever. Ammo depletion for high explosive is on a roll of 1. It may be low ammo. You re-roll if you get another 1. It is now low ammo and is penalized. The second type of ammunition rolls, you're going to mark off high explosive and canister each time you use it, and I'm definitely going to, well, I'm pretty sure I'm going to use that. High explosive can only be used in melee if canister is not available. Canister is only used in melee, and you cannot fire at half strength or otherwise mark half boxes. So, as you fire off your ammo, shit. Having to switch hands is a pain. It's good that I have 2, though, right? As you mark off your ammo, once you run out, you just cannot fire that thing anymore. And it doesn't cost you any victory points, but the howitzers are a powerful part of the U.S. Leaders in column HQ. And I'm assuming the column HQ is in the game because it's not mentioned in either place. Leaders are important for rallying routed and pinned units. They also affect melee combat, moral checks, and retreat before melee. Depending on the activity, units either have to be attached to, stacked with, or command radius of a leader to get the benefit. Attached leaders are stacked with a unit. If there's only a single unit on the hex, they're placed on top of that unit and they're attached to it. If the unit is pinned, retreats are routed. The leader is also pinned and must retreat or rout with the unit. Leader must be attached to a unit in melee in order to give its bonus. If there's 2 or more units in the hex, you attach it to the unit of your choice. If the unit is pinned, retreats, or routed, you can swap to a different unit. If there's multiple leaders in a hex, each leader can be attached to a unit. More than one leader may be attached to a given unit. If there's multiple leaders on a given unit, the senior leader only applies his modifier. Leaders can move in any mode at the player's option. There's no cost for them to change mode. Okay, they influence rally attempts if they're stacked with the leader. And this is going to be their command rating. They influence melee combat if they're attached to a unit. I don't know if this is all spelled out somewhere. So they have like leader stacked with unit affects melee. Here it's attached. It should be attached. So I don't know how much to trust the player aids on this. There's got to be some errata for this sucker. Morale checks. You can add your morale check modifier. Again, it's all the same command rating. If you're within command radius of that leader. And you retreat before melee. You add the leader rating if you are stacked with the leader. That's going to be a pain to remember all those different things. And I'm not sure how much I like that level of distinguishment. Leader casualties. When a unit in the same hex as the leader takes a casualty point, there's a chance you get lost. And we checked that. All kind of specifics here. I'm not going to go into the specifics of the mortal wound, but you basically have to carry the leader back to like your camp or whatever and try to heal him. I kind of talked about it. A friendly leader not stacked in a hex with a combat unit is killed if an enemy combat unit moves onto him. The U.S. has 2 replacement leaders, which can replace a a killed mortally or severely wounded leader. If Carson's removed from the game, he's replaced by the next in line, etc. The column HQ. This is a unit that counts as both a combat unit and a route rally location. It has a combat strength of 1, which cannot melee attack. Its movement mode is freely changeable, but picked by the owner at the time, just like leaders. It doesn't cost anything to switch formation. The headquarters is a rally point for retreating and routing units and for wounded leaders. As long as Colonel Carson is not killed or mortally wounded in the headquarters, must always be within his command radius. If it's separated, it must move using all available movement points. If Carson gets killed or mortally wounded, the headquarters has to spend all available movement points to move to the closest U.S. combat unit or leader, or to the pack train. Morale checks and rally. I thought we already covered this. We didn't cover rally. Did we cover morale check? I don't fucking know. No, but it's pretty simple. It's a table. It's got modifiers. Rally's a little bit more complicated. A unit that is... Okay, when you make the morale check, there's different results, though. You might just be disrupted, which is really just a penalty that you can recover from through movement. You might be retreated. You might be pinned, in which case you can't move or fire. You might be routed, in which case you take the full route rolls. Rally. Any unit that's routed or pinned can recover during the rally phase. All units are rallied individually. Leaders automatically rally from any effects during the rally phase. Disruption is recovered during movement. Any unit stacked in the same hex with a leader gets the leader's combat rating bonuses, a die roll modifier. They roll on the rally attempt, the rally table. If you get a 1, that's not a no if you're in command radius of a leader, which I don't know why that's an issue. Ignore if in command. I don't think there are leaders with a 0 combat command rating, so that doesn't even make sense. Okay. May have been an artifact of something earlier. Oh, there are minuses. Ignore if in command radius of leader. Well, I don't know what happens if I ignore the result. Well, we'll just... This may be supposed to say that this requires you to make, that this routes you if you fail on a 1, if you're not already routed. I have a feeling that's the case. Any unit that's stacked in the same hex with the leader gets the bonus. Units that are pinned or routed must attempt to rally from the pin first and then the route. But even if the pin check, rally check fails, they still get the route rally check. This is important because you might not want route movement. So you can't just rally it from the route and keep them pinned. But it could end up that way. I gotta swap batteries. Okay, rallies have to... A routed unit has to succeed in its rally check to unroute. Not surprising. Pinned units that are not adjacent to enemy combat units automatically rally during the rally phase. If they are adjacent to an enemy combat phase, they have to try to roll. It says must attempt to. Disrupted units may remove the disruption marker by spending 2 movement points in the same hex. I thought it was only 1. After units recovered from disruption, the unit can continue its normal movement. The rally table, well, yes and no are spelled out here. No asterisk is not. I don't know. But you ignore a no asterisk if you're in command radius of the leader. Which, you can't possibly get the 1. So I'm just not going to worry about that. Because you can't self-rally in range of the leader. Strangely, self-rally is not listed here? No, it is. Yeah. Self-rally is the U.S. May attempt to rally outside of command radius of a leader. Indian and scout units, however, can self-rally without any penalty. Yeah. Okay. Right. And there are definitely artifacts in these rules that are not good. I just don't feel like looking for errata. Ammo supply. So normally ammo supply is off die rolls, like it was in Great Battles of the American Civil War, and you get a low ammo marker. That is a penalty. You don't actually run out of ammo in this game. You just get a penalty to your fire combat. Okay. And it halves your strength for fire and melee, whatever. Each U.S. unit with a low ammo marker at the end of the game costs the U.S. 1 victory point. There is a pack train. It's not in this scenario, but it can rearm the small arms and the howitzer, and it carries particular different types of shell. Actually, it's 2 pack train counters. Okay. But there are options. The first one is, it really sucks the first time you fire if you go low ammo. That doesn't, what did they do? Drop their ammo in the stream or something? So they put an exemption on that as one of the options. The other option, which I'm most likely to use, is I'm going to track the actual ammo as I fire it. Each time you fire a howitzer round, high explosive ore canister, you mark it off. Each time you fire cav, infantry, or scout, you have the option of either firing at full strength, in which case you put an X in, or half strength with 1 slash, and you are affected with the low ammo penalty, I believe, right? No, you're at half strength, yeah. When all the boxes are crossed out, the unit is ammo depleted and can't fire at all. The U.S. applies low ammo modifiers only if the unit has no ammo boxes remaining and it's involved in melee. Indian units will always use the basic ammo rolls. They do not have any of this because they might only have one shot. Not going to worry about the resupply rolls. For victory point purposes, each cavalry, infantry, or scout that's considered low ammo, if it has 3 or fewer ammo boxes remaining, the howitzer is low ammo if it has 3 or fewer high explosive remaining. I'm going to ignore the pack train that has a significant number of rolls, but it's not going to apply to the scenario I'm going to play. Basically, it's kind of like artillery in that it has minders on it and whatnot, but like the artillery wagons in GBACW, it can resupply units. I think they have to be adjacent. Cav charge. Mounted cav units can declare a cav charge during the U.S. movement phase. If they do so, they get a strength point bonus equal to 1/2 of their strength added to their melee combat strength. A 1 strength point unit gets a full 1 strength point bonus. Well, that's half rounded up, yeah. They also get an extra movement point in their movement allowance for charge. The attacking player declares a target hex and engages those defending units in melee combat during the subsequent melee phase. If all the defending units retreat before melee, the attacking units must pursue, and they don't have to roll. The unit must have been in good order at the beginning of the movement phase. It must move at least 1 hex towards the target hex. It may only charge through or into clear hexes. It cannot charge across creeks. It cannot change more than 1 level of elevation during the entire charge. And at the end of the melee combat, it will be disrupted unless it's routed. A cav unit cannot charge during pursuit movement. U.S. horse holders are divided into 2 types of units, those with horses and those without. Horse holders will lose control of their charges if the unit is involved in melee or becomes pinned or routed. Flip the unit into its holder. No horses side. God, my throat is going. It's got a horse or it's got a gun. Okay. Oh, fuck. Scouts and headquarters do not have a holder without horses on the reverse side, so these units are removed from play. I don't know if that's right. Scouts and headquarters do not have a holder without horses. Wow. Oh, yeah, but they don't count against the unit. Okay, so that's fair. Horses may intentionally be abandoned by simply flipping the unit over to a mountless side. I don't know why you do that. Except for Indian victory points lost or abandoned horses cannot be recovered for the rest of the game. Doesn't sound like it. That's worded right. Holders without horses are combat units and function as such for all rules. I want to see something. Nope, they still remain defensive only. Okay, that's what I want to see. Pony holders don't have a ponyless side. Again, they're not really a strength point. If engaged in melee combat, pinned or routed, they are removed from play. Lost or abandoned U.S. horses may be captured by the Indian player. This just gives them victory points. There's a lost or abandoned horse table, and you roll on that, and it's worth a victory point if you succeed. And that happens whenever a horse is lost or abandoned. Can't, like, choose, I'm nowhere near the Indians, I'll abandon my horses. Still get a chance of catching them. No U.S. horse counters are involved or placed on the map under Indian control. This is just victory points. Breastworks, not in this game, because in order to build them, you need the crates on board the pack train. Basically, you're unloading food and non-ammunition supply, and you get yourself a little defensive benefit out of it. And it takes you like a full movement allowance to fix. Grass fires. Either side can try to set the grass on fire. I can't keep going. My throat's hurting too much. There's almost nothing left, but Yeah, okay, we'll just keep going. It's this grass or whatever is in here. It is choking me. I have this problem normally, but it's worse with this shit. And I don't think it's mold. I think it's the cut grass. Both players can set the grass on fire during their movement phase. You're only allowed to set a number of grass fires equal to the number of counters. That's for the game. They get put away after that. And so one person can set lots of fires to deprive the other person of the ability to set fires, which feels like a cheap thing. Any combat unit can spend 3 movement points in a hex to put a grass fire. You roll 2 dice. That's the number of turns, and there are counters that go up to 7, 8, I don't know. That's the number of turns the fire will burn beyond the current turn. You put casualty markers to keep count of the burn duration. The unit that sets the fire has to leave during the same movement phase. If it doesn't have enough remaining movement points, it finds them. Grass fire hexes are prohibited terrain and block line of sight. Indian casualty limits. Okay. The Indian player has casualty limits. Each warrior unit casualty, not leaders, pony holders, or camps, suffered by the Indian player advances the casualty marker by 1. At the beginning of the game, each casualty is only worth 1 victory point to the U.S. player. When their casualties reach 14, the U.S. player will be getting 2 victory points per loss. That's inclusive. When the Indian casualty count reaches 20, the Indian player can no longer initiate melee combat unless the target is within 5 hexes of an unburned Indian camp or a warrior unit is stacked with a leader. And once that's met, it's for the whole game because you can't raise the dead. The Indian camps. So there are a bunch of Indian camps on the board. Most of them have units on them. This one does not. All right. There's the Kiowa camp, which is over here. It's located along Karsten Creek. They are alert at the beginning of the game. They can move normally. They can be mounted or dismounted at the Indian player's option at the start of the game. I've got them mounted. If dismounted, place 4 pony holders in any hex within 2 hexes of a warrior or the camp. These units are alerted and may move and fight normally. The units are marked with red movement and combat factors for easy identification. I don't know about that. I am not seeing red movement and combat factors. They look the same, but they're a different group. They're slightly different color. So, my plan with them is to abandon the Kiowa camps. I don't want to fight there. I want to fall back and join with my masses. The combined Kiowa Comanche camp, and this has 2 Kiowa who do not look any redder or less red. All these units are on foot because their ponies are over here. They have to be alerted. I can't move anything until their camp's alerted. They can be alerted in different ways. If a unit enters any one combined Comanche Kiowa camp hex, this alerts the pony herd and the entire camp. If a U.S. unit moves within 5 hexes of a combined Comanche Kiowa camp or the pony herd, this will alert both. Once the camp has been alerted, the Indian player can move units in the subsequent Indian movement phase. For warriors, you roll a d6, and that's the number of units that you can move on the turn that the camp is first alerted. For the pony herd, you roll a d6. This is the number of pony herd counters that are flipped over to their pony holder side, and these have been gathered up and can be used. When an Indian combat unit enters a pony herd hex, it flips over 1 pony herd counter to its pony holder side. It may now mount using this pony holder if it has enough movement points remaining. After the initial turn of alert, all subsequent alert rolls use 2d6 instead of 1d6. U.S. cavalry and infantry unit that is not mounted, disrupted, pinned, or routed may loot a camp marker that doesn't have an Indian in it and has not been burned or looted. The U.S. unit must begin the turn in the camp hex and spend the entire turn's movement phase in the camp hex. You mark it as looted, and you give the U.S. player a victory point. It can't do anything else, including firing and melee. A U.S. cavalry or infantry unit, I really should say or, not and. Same thing, except you can burn a camp. This costs you 3 additional movement points. Instead of a full turn, you have to exit the hex during the same movement phase. If you don't have the movement points, you find them. You cannot conduct other activity during it. As a result of this free move, the camp counter is flipped over to its burned side. The U.S. player gets a victory point for each burned counter, and the burning camp counter remains in the hex until the next U.S. player's movement phase. It then burns out and is removed. While on the map, a burning camp is prohibited and blocks LOS. I need to drink. I may have to get that shit out of here. Yeah. A maximum, okay, the pony herd. A maximum of 2 pony herd counters can stack in a hex at the start of the game. Once gathered, normal stacking rules apply for the pony herders. Gathering the herd, except for Kiowa with Gohausen, this group over here, at the start of the game, all Indian units are dismounted and cannot mount until they gather their ponies. When an Indian unit enters a pony herd hex, it flips over 1 pony herd to the pony herder counter. It can now mount using the pony holder if it has enough movement points. All rules for mounting, dismounting apply normally. Basically, you have to go to the pony herd, except some of them you're going to be rolling for and they'll be gathered up otherwise. U.S. scouts can capture Indian ponies. When a scout enters a hex with pony herd, the U.S. player consults the capture ponies table and rolls a die. If they get a yes, the pony herd is captured. Each scout unit can capture 1 pony counter. The captured pony herd counter must remain stacked with the scout unit in order to remain under control. While controlling the herd, a scout can only move as though it's dismounted. It may remain mounted if it has horses and counts as a mounted unit for combat purposes, but it still moves at dismounted rate. Victory points for these ponies are not awarded until the scout exits the western map edge permanently with the ponies. If the scout conducts fire or melee combat or becomes pinned or routed, the ponies are abandoned and they scatter. Scatter means they turn into pony herd and someone can gather them. I'm assuming they can't alert. Someone has to actually go pick them up if they scattered, as opposed to the initial state. The scout or U.S. cavalry infantry unit can purposefully scatter the herd. If they purposely scatter a herd, they must spend a movement point in the hex and then remain in the hex for the rest of the current movement phase. If 2 herd counters are in the hex, scatter roll for each one successfully. What do you have to roll? Yeah. I don't know why you have to roll. You might be doing the capture ponies and then just let them go. Scattered ponies can be gathered. Oh, let's see. Roll a d6 and oh, whoa. This is totally different. Roll a d6 and consult the scatter diagram on the map. Where the fuck is that? Okay. Well, I can't. Oh, I don't see it. Okay. Let's keep seeing. This is the direction the ponies will move. I can make it up. And then roll 2d6 for the distance and move the indicated number of hexes. They remain there until captured or scattered again by U.S. Scout, Infantry, or Cav, or an Indian moves into the hex and gains control of them. Herds that scatter move off the map or permanently removed from the game. Okay. Oh, If you fail to capture, they scatter. If there are 2 pony herd counters in the hex and one is captured, the other is scatter. And gotcha. You can scatter 2, and the roll for separately means they each do a different direction and distance. Scattered ponies can be gathered by pony holders. Each time a pony herd scatters and completes its scatter move, the Indian player consults the Lost Abandoned Horses chart. That's over here. And they roll. And they get a victory point? Instead of giving them a victory point, they unflip the counter at that point. So basically, if you go chase the herd off, the pony herders might go find it. In which case, you don't want to chase an already ungathered herd. We've got the setup, and basically this is a box. I could have been anywhere inside of here, and the pony herd is some distance from a hex, and I'm as close to the camp as I could be. These guys are here. Kit Carson and company are going to come in on this side of the map. And that's about it. The alternate scenario brings another commander in, some infantry, and the 2 pack trains. What's the victory points? The Adobe Fort is worth 5. Kit Carson's worth a buttload. Other leaders are worth 5. Howitzers are worth 5. Each Indian leader is worth 4 other than Dohausen. Each U.S. leader wounded is worth 2. The Indian player gets a point for each U.S. combat factor that voluntarily exits the map prior to turn 23. You don't want to do that. It's the same as being killed, I think. Yeah, not necessarily. He doesn't get them if it's forced off due to combat results or morale. The U.S. loses 1 victory point for each U.S. unit marked low ammo at the end of the game. Each ammo point that's taken from the pack train costs you victory points. Oh, fuck, my throat. Indian victory point for each lost captured U.S. horses. Unburned camps that are looted are worth a victory point, and camps that are burned are worth a victory point. And they're tracked as you go. Okay, that's it. I want to get out of here before my throat dies completely.